SMEE shipped a working immersion scanner to SMIC in roughly the time it takes a Western fab to qualify a single new process node. That single sentence rewrites what Western analysts said was possible on China's domestic lithography timeline. But the question is not whether China has the tool. It does. The question is whether having the tool is the same as running the clock, and whether the lead ASML holds is measured in capability or in calendar. Two clocks are running in this race. They are not running at the same speed. The capability clock measures what a tool can demonstrate. The calendar clock measures when that demonstration becomes a production wafer at volume. A breakthrough changes the tempo of one clock. This story has two clocks running at different tempos, and the race between them is what the next several years of semiconductor competition actually turns on. Start with the machine itself. SMEE's SSA800-10W is a 193 nanometer immersion scanner, the first domestic Chinese tool of its class, delivered to SMIC for evaluation around early 2025. 193 nanometers is the optical wavelength. It is the same class as ASML's mature NXT immersion line, not the newer extreme ultraviolet systems. To understand what that wavelength means in practice, hold this image. A 193 nanometer wavelength of light is roughly 400 times wider than the features being printed at the leading edge today. Squeezing features that fine out of that wavelength requires layering exposures on top of each other, like transparencies on an overhead projector, each layer offset by fractions of a nanometer. That offset tolerance is what overlay measures. It is the difference between a feature that conducts and one that shorts. ASML's NXT immersion platform has been in volume production for years. The company's extreme ultraviolet systems, the machines that print at sub-7 nanometer geometries without requiring multi-patterning at every layer, represent roughly a decade of cumulative engineering in extreme ultraviolet light sources, tin droplet plasma generation, and mechanically isolated projection optics. No other company on Earth ships extreme ultraviolet tools at volume. ASML's immersion installed base runs into the hundreds of units across the major fabs worldwide. The SSA 800-10W sits in the same optical generation as tools ASML was shipping roughly a decade ago. The company's own disclosures, reported around early 2025, confirmed delivery to SMIC in an evaluation capacity. This is a genuine first. It is the first domestic Chinese immersion scanner to reach a leading Chinese fab. Think of it like two runners where one has already lapped the track and is halfway through a second lap at a faster stride. The second runner just crossed the start line cleanly for the first time. The form looks good. The gap is still a lap. ASML's clock on the tool itself. Volume production on immersion mature, extreme ultraviolet already the production standard at the frontier. SMEE's clock, first immersion delivery, evaluation phase, extreme ultraviolet not on a public roadmap with a confirmed date. My read is that the Western press misread the SMEE delivery as a manufacturing event. It was a metrology event. What got proved is that the overlay number is real, not that the yield is real. Those two things are separated by years, not quarters, which brings the race to the overlay leg. Reports on the SSA 800-10W cite an overlay figure near 1.9 nanometers. Overlay is the measure of how precisely one exposure layer lands on top of the previous one, threading the same needle 4 times in sequence and needing each pass to land within a human hair's width of the last. Except, the needle is moving at production speed and the thread is light. Demonstrating it once in a controlled environment and demonstrating it across a shift of wafers are different athletic events. If that 1.9 nanometer figure holds under production conditions, and no independent benchmark has confirmed this yet, it opens the door to multi-patterning schemes that could, in principle, reach feature sizes in the 11 nanometer class. Multi-patterning is the technique of printing the same layer multiple times with offset masks, effectively multiplying the resolution a single exposure pass can achieve. The math works. The question the fab floor asks is whether the overlay holds across 10,000 wafers, not 10. ASML's NXT immersion tools in volume production environments achieve overlay figures pushed into the single-digit nanometer range through decades of iterative refinement, wafer stage engineering, laser interferometry, real-time correction algorithms. Critically, these figures are achieved at production throughput, not on a handful of demonstration wafers. That distinction is the entire race on this leg. Here is where I want to break on my own enthusiasm. The 1.9 nanometer overlay number is real enough to take seriously. It is not a press release number with no engineering behind it, but every multi-patterning step, added to reach 11 nanometer class chips, multiplies the number of times a wafer visits the scanner, and each visit is another chance for the overlay to drift. The math of multi-patterning is like a budget that always balances on paper. The fab floor is where the budget meets the actual month-end numbers. ASML's clock on overlay. Figures in this range confirmed at volume scale across hundreds of installed tools. SMEE's clock, a single reported figure. Evaluation conditions, volume confirmation pending. The lead is compressing. But the next leg is where that compression meets its hardest wall. An ASML immersion scanner does not arrive alone. It arrives as the centerpiece of a fully integrated ecosystem. Photoresist qualified for its specific exposure profile, pellicles that protect masks from contamination, metrology tools calibrated to its overlay signature, and process recipes refined across thousands of customer wafers at dozens of fabs over many years. Carl Zeiss supplies the precision optics. The light source comes from Cymer, an ASML subsidiary. The whole stack is integrated across decades and across continents. When a new NXT variant ships to a customer fab, the process engineers already know the tool's behavior because the previous generation taught them. The scanner lands in a room full of knowledge. China's domestic lithography ecosystem is being assembled in parallel with the scanner itself. Domestic photoresist development is ongoing. Analysts note that high-end resists for immersion, lithography remain a significant gap, with meaningful import dependence still in place. Domestic pellicle production is reported to be in early stages. Metrology tools, the instruments that verify overlay and critical dimension after each exposure step, represent a separate capability gap that the SSA800-10W cannot close on its own. The scanner is real. The stack the scanner assumes is still being sourced, developed, and qualified. A racing engine without the gearbox, the tires, and the telemetry is a loud object on a dyno. It proves the combustion works. It does not prove the lap time. SMEE has demonstrated the engine. The rest of the drivetrain is the race. ASML's clock on ecosystem. Fully integrated, multi-decade, distributed across allied supplier bases. SMEE's clock. Scanner delivered, surrounding stack in various stages of domestic development. Some elements still imported or sourced through channels that sanctions pressure continues to constrain. Now, the break. This is the leg where the headlines and the race part company. Read only the capability clock, and the gap looks like it is closing fast. 3 legs in, the tool arrived, the overlay number was credible, the multi-patterning path exists on paper, and the engineering trajectory is faster than most Western analysts projected even 2 years ago. The case that the lead is closing faster than it looks has real evidence behind it. SMEE got an immersion scanner to SMIC years ahead of what the consensus timeline suggested was possible. China has shown before, in solar manufacturing, in high-speed rail deployment, in electric vehicle adoption, that the transition from demonstration to volume can compress faster than incumbent timelines assume, if the capability clock is running hotter than expected. It is not unreasonable to wonder whether the calendar clock follows. But the calendar clock is telling a different story right now. Volume production on domestic immersion tools is not expected before roughly 2027 per reports. Domestic capability at sub-10 nanometer nodes is not projected before roughly 2030. That is not a gap measured in product cycles. It is a gap measured in strategic planning horizons. ASML will ship extreme ultraviolet tools throughout that entire window. The next generation of extreme ultraviolet EO higher numerical aperture systems that push the optical limits further still is entering early customer evaluation now. The frontier does not pause, and the ecosystem gap, resists, Pellicles, Metrology, does not close when the scanner ships. It closes when the scanner has run enough wafers to teach the surrounding supply chain what it needs. That teaching requires time on the fab floor at volume. The SSA800-10W is in evaluation. Evaluation is not teaching the supply chain. It is testing whether the supply chain has enough to learn from. The capability clock and the calendar clock are both real, and right now they are running at different speeds. The capability clock is posting genuine splits. The calendar clock is barely advancing. The gap between a working tool and a production tool, measured in years, is what this race actually clocks for the next stretch. ASML's clock on production readiness, extreme ultraviolet in volume production now. Next generation high numerical aperture, extreme ultraviolet entering early customer evaluation. SMEE's clock. Immersion scanner in evaluation phase. Volume production target roughly 2027. Sub 10 nanometer domestic lithography target roughly 2030. Or a gap of years on the calendar clock even as the capability clock keeps moving. 12 months out, here is the plain call. SMEE's capability clock keeps posting. Expect more overlay data, possibly from SMIC's evaluation runs, and likely a public roadmap update that advances stated specs. The calendar clock will move less. Volume production on the SSA800-10W will still be a future date, not a current fact. The ecosystem gaps, resist, pellicle, metrology, will narrow at the edges and remain wide at the center. ASML will ship more extreme ultraviolet tools. The frontier node will not pause to wait. The honest version of the 12-month forecast is that SMEE's capability clock will keep posting impressive numbers and almost none of them will move the calendar clock. That divergence is not a sign the race is fake. It is the race. The SMEE delivery was a genuine milestone, and the Western instinct to dismiss it entirely is wrong. But the version of this story, where China's domestic lithography closes the gap to ASML within a planning horizon, is not the story the calendar clock is telling. What SMEE proved is that the capability clock is faster than the skeptics said. What the calendar clock proves is that a fast capability clock and a production-ready process are separated by something the clock cannot fix alone, and that something is time on the fab floor, at volume, across real wafers, teaching a supply chain that is still being built. The SSA 800-10W is where both clocks are visible at once. It is a real machine in a real fab. It is also not yet a production tool. Both of those things are true simultaneously. And the distance between them, not the machine's spec sheet, not ASML's installed base count, is the actual race. A breakthrough changes the tempo of one clock. This story has two clocks running at different tempos, and the race is the gap between them. The capability clock rang, the calendar clock is still winding up. The only question that matters now is how long before they read the same time, and whether the frontier moves faster than the answer. When do you think the calendar clock catches the capability clock? And when it does, which node does China reach first? Drop your call in the comments. If you want to watch both clocks in real time, subscribe, because the next split is coming faster than the last one did.